I'll go with him, if it saves my family's name. The words left my lips like autumn leaves in a bitter wind, fragile and final. Papa's weathered hands trembled as he counted the silver coins, each piece a reminder of our desperation. The stranger stood in our doorway, tall and silent, his dark coat dripping from the evening rain that had been falling for 3 days straight. $20, Papa whispered, his voice breaking like dried timber. That's all we owe now. The debt had been crushing us for months. Ever since the drought killed our crops and the bank started circling like vultures. Every morning brought new threats, new demands for payment we couldn't make. Mama had sold her wedding ring first, then her mother's china, piece by precious piece, until our home felt hollow as a stripped bone. I watched the stranger's face in the flickering candlelight. Deep lines etched around his eyes spoke of hardship, but his gaze held something I couldn't name. Not cruelty, not hunger, something else entirely. His presence filled our small cabin like smoke from a distant fire, dangerous but somehow not threatening. "The girl comes with me tonight," he said, his voice low and steady as river stones. No tears, no looking back. Mama pressed a small bundle into my hands, my few belongings wrapped in her old shawl. The fabric still smelled of lavender and hope, memories of better times when she'd sing while mending our clothes by the fire. Her kiss on my forehead felt like goodbye to everything I'd ever known. The cabin that had sheltered 3 generations of our family now felt like a tomb, cold and empty despite the dying embers in the hearth. "Be good, Sarah," she whispered, her voice catching on my name. "Be grateful for this chance." But what chance was this? To be sold like livestock to a man whose name I didn't even know. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight against this fate that had been chosen for me. But Papa's shoulders shook with silent sobs, and I knew our family's survival hung by a thread thinner than spider silk. The stranger turned without another word, his boots heavy on our wooden porch. Each step echoed like a funeral drum. I followed him into the darkness, leaving behind the only home I'd ever known. Rain began to fall harder, washing away my tears before they could freeze on my cheeks. The world beyond our fence stretched black and endless, full of unknowns that terrified me. His horse stood waiting, a massive black stallion that snorted steam into the cold air. The animal was magnificent, with eyes that gleamed like polished coal and muscles that rippled beneath its sleek coat. Without speaking, the stranger lifted me onto the saddle as if I weighed no more than a child's doll, then mounted behind me. His coat wrapped around my shoulders, blocking the wind. The leather smelled of tobacco and something else, something clean and unfamiliar like pine trees and fresh rain. "Where are we going?" I asked as we rode away from the fading light of our cabin. "Home," he replied simply. But I had no idea what that word meant anymore. Home was the place I'd just left behind, where Mama's quilts covered our beds and Papa's laugh used to fill the rafters. The stranger's heartbeat drummed against my back as we rode through the night, steady and strong, and I wondered if I'd just been sold to the devil himself. Every hoofbeat carried me further from everything familiar, deeper into uncertainty that made my chest tight with fear. The last thing I saw was Papa's silhouette in our doorway, growing smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed everything I'd ever loved. His shoulders sagged with shame, and I knew this moment would haunt him forever. Even from this distance I could see the way his hand covered his face, hiding tears he'd never let me see. Miles passed in silence. The stranger's arms remained steady around me, never wandering, never threatening, just protective. It confused me more than cruelty would have. I'd expected rough hands and harsh words, the behavior of a man who saw me as property he'd purchased. Instead, his touch felt careful, respectful, as if I were made of something precious that might break. "What's your name?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible over the rain and thunder of hooves. "Thomas," he said after a long pause. "Thomas Whitmore." "Why did you pay for me, Mr. Whitmore?" Another silence stretched between us, filled only by the rhythm of hooves on muddy ground. I could feel his chest rise and fall with each breath, steady and calm despite the storm raging around us. The rain had soaked through everything, but his body heat kept me warm against the cold that tried to seep into my bones. "Because," he said quietly, "everyone deserves a chance at something better." The rain began to ease as we crested a hill, and I saw lights flickering in the distance like fallen stars. A farmhouse, larger than any I'd ever seen, sat nestled in a valley below. Smoke curled from its chimney, promising warmth and shelter. Lanterns glowed in several windows, and I could see the outline of a barn, corrals, and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity I'd never known. "That's home," Thomas said. Then I heard something in his voice. Loneliness, perhaps, or hope. Maybe both. As we descended toward the lights, I caught my breath. This wasn't just a farmhouse. It was a ranch, sprawling and well-maintained, with white painted fences that gleamed even in the darkness. Gardens lined the pathway to the front door, and I could see the shadows of healthy cattle in the distant pastures. But what I didn't know was that this man, this stranger who'd bought me like cattle, was about to change everything I believed about love, family, and the meaning of home. What I didn't know was that Thomas Whitmore carried secrets darker than the night around us, secrets that would soon test every assumption I'd made about him and about my own worth. And what terrified me most was the way my heart had already begun to trust him, even as my mind screamed warnings I couldn't ignore. The warmth of his body against mine felt more like protection than possession, and that frightened me more than any cruelty ever could. Because if I was wrong about him, if this kindness was just another kind of trap, I didn't think my heart could survive being broken again. The night was restless after the exchange. Sarah sat silently in the corner of the small room, her shawl clutched tightly against her chest. She could still hear the echo of the coins sliding across the table, the sound burning into her memory like a cruel hymn. Her father had left quickly, unable to face her eyes. Her mother lingered at the doorway, lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, an apology, a blessing, but no words came. Only silence remained, heavier than the storm outside. When the door creaked open, Thomas stepped in. His presence filled the room with a strange mixture of dread and protection. He removed his hat, water dripping from the brim, and placed it gently on the table where the money had been. For a long moment he said nothing, his brown eyes studying her as if searching for fragments of strength in her fragile frame. "You should rest," he finally murmured. His voice was steady, not unkind. Sarah wanted to protest, to demand her life back, but the words withered before they reached her lips. Instead, she nodded faintly, like a prisoner accepting her chains. That night she slept in fits, haunted by dreams of open fields and her father's trembling hands. Dawn came too soon, painting the world in pale gold. When she awoke, Thomas was already saddling the horses outside. The clinking of bridles, the stamping of hooves, the faint snort of the animals, it all sounded like the rhythm of a new life she had never chosen. Sarah stepped out into the courtyard, the morning air sharp with the scent of dust and wet wood. She held her shawl tighter, her heart heavy. Thomas mounted his horse with practiced ease, then turned to her. "We should leave before the town wakes." She climbed onto the second horse, her hands shaking against the reins. As they rode away, the town faded behind her, familiar yet forever lost. Ahead stretched the endless road, uncertain, merciless, and waiting to decide her fate. Thomas helped me down from the horse with the same careful gentleness he'd shown all night. My legs trembled as my feet touched solid ground, whether from cold or fear I couldn't say. The ranch house loomed before us, its windows glowing like warm amber against the storm. "Come," he said simply, leading me up the wide porch steps. The front door opened before we reached it, and an elderly woman appeared in the doorway. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her weathered face showed neither surprise nor judgment at seeing a rain-soaked stranger girl on her doorstep. "This is Mrs. Henderson," Thomas said. "She keeps the house." "Evening, miss," the woman said kindly. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." I followed her through rooms larger than our entire cabin back home. Rich carpets covered polished wooden floors, and paintings hung on walls lined with bookshelves. A grandfather clock chimed midnight as we climbed a staircase with carved railings that must have cost more than Papa made in a year. "This will be your room," Mrs. Henderson said, opening a door to reveal a space that took my breath away. The bed alone was bigger than the corner where I'd slept back home. A fireplace crackled with warm light and thick curtains framed windows that would show the valley when morning came. Clean nightclothes lay folded on the coverlet, and a wash basin with actual hot water steamed on a small table. "Mr. Whitmore said to make you comfortable," she continued. "There's food in the kitchen when you're ready, and clean dresses in the wardrobe. Rest now, child. Tomorrow will bring what it brings." But sleep wouldn't come, despite the soft mattress and warm quilts. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain against the windows and wondering what price I'd be expected to pay for such luxury. No man gave away comfort like this without wanting something in return. When morning light finally crept through the curtains, I dressed in one of the simple but well-made dresses from the wardrobe and made my way downstairs. The smell of bacon and fresh bread drew me toward the kitchen, where Mrs. Henderson was preparing breakfast. "Good morning, dear," she said without turning around. "Mr. Whitmore's already gone to check the cattle. Sit yourself down." She placed a plate before me with more food than I'd seen in weeks. Real eggs, thick slices of bacon, biscuits with butter and honey. My stomach clenched with hunger, but suspicion held me back. "Why is he being kind to me?" I asked quietly. Mrs. Henderson's hands stilled for a moment. She turned to study my face with eyes that had seen too much of the world's hardness. "Some men take what they want," she said finally. "Others wait for it to be given. Mr. Whitmore is the waiting kind." "What does he want from me?" "That's between you and him, child. But I'll tell you this, I've worked for Thomas Whitmore for 8 years, and I've never seen him raise his hand to anyone, animal or human. Can't say that about many men in these parts." I ate in silence, tasting safety for the first time in months, but safety felt dangerous when you didn't know its price. Later that morning I found Thomas in the barn, tending to his horses. He looked up when I entered, and in the daylight I could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than I'd thought, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes the color of winter sky. A scar ran along his left jaw, and his hands, though gentle, bore the calluses of hard work. "Sleep well?" he asked, continuing to brush the black stallion's coat. "Yes, sir. Thank you. No need for sir here. Thomas will do." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. The barn smelled of hay and leather, clean and comfortable sounds of horses moving in their stalls. "I don't understand," I said finally. "The house, the food, the clothes. What do you expect from me?" He set down the brush and turned to face me fully. "Nothing you're not willing to give. But you paid for me. I paid your father's debt. That's different." "Is it?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, leaning against the stall door. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Fever took her and our unborn child. This place has been too quiet ever since." My heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry. I'm not looking to replace her," he continued. "But a house needs life in it, and you needed a place to be safe. Seemed like we might help each other. And if I want to leave? Then you leave. I won't stop you. But where would I go? Back to parents who'd sold me to save themselves. To a world that saw me as damaged goods. The terrible truth was that I had nowhere else to run, and we both knew it." "What would you want me to do here?" I asked. "Help Mrs. Henderson with the house if you like. Learn to read if you don't already. There's a piano in the parlor, if music interests you, or nothing at all. The choice is yours." The kindness in his offer scared me more than cruelty would have. Cruelty, I understood. This gentleness felt like a trap wrapped in silk. But as I watched him return to caring for his horses, moving with quiet competence and treating each animal with respect, I began to wonder if some traps might be worth walking into. Maybe, just maybe, Thomas Whitmore was exactly what he seemed to be, a lonely man offering shelter to someone who desperately needed it. Yet something in his eyes told me there were still secrets hidden in the shadows of this beautiful ranch, the way he sometimes stared at the horizon as if watching for something that never came, the careful distance he maintained even in kindness. The locked room at the end of the upstairs hallway that Mrs. Henderson never mentioned. That evening as I helped prepare supper, I found myself watching Thomas through the kitchen window. He moved through the yard with purpose, checking fences and gates with the methodical precision of a man who left nothing to chance. But when he thought no one was looking, his shoulders sagged with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "He's a good man," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, following my gaze. "But pain changes people, makes them careful about letting anyone close." "What happened to his wife?" "That's his story to tell, not mine. But I will say this, he loved that woman like she was the sun itself. When she died, the light went out of him." As if sensing our attention, Thomas looked up toward the kitchen window. Our eyes met through the glass, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his expression, hope maybe, or fear, perhaps both. And until I knew what secrets this ranch held, what ghosts still walked these halls, I couldn't let myself believe that his kindness would last. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book I'd never learned to read. Thomas kept his distance, respectful as morning mist, while I found my rhythm in the strange luxury of his world. Henderson taught me to knead bread until my hands stopped shaking, to polish silver until it gleamed like captured moonlight. But it was the small moments that undid me. The way Thomas left wildflowers on the kitchen table without a word. How he repaired the broken handle on my hairbrush before I even asked. The careful space he maintained between us, as if I were something precious that might shatter. "You're learning fast," Mrs. Henderson said one afternoon as I helped her hang laundry in the warm sun. The sheets snapped like flags of surrender in the desert wind. "Learning what?" "To breathe again." She was right. For the first time since Papa's hands counted those silver coins, my chest didn't feel crushed by invisible stones. I slept without nightmares. I ate without tasting fear. That evening I found courage enough to venture beyond the house's protective walls. The ranch stretched endlessly under a sky painted with sunset fire, and I walked toward the corrals where Thomas worked with a young colt. His movements were patient, rhythmic, like a prayer spoken in gesture rather than words. "He's beautiful," I said, approaching the fence. Thomas looked up, surprised to find me there. The colt danced sideways, all nervous energy and untamed spirit. "Reminds me of something," he said quietly, his eyes finding mine. "Wild thing learning to trust." Heat rose in my cheeks at the gentle accusation in his words. Maybe some wild things should stay wild. Maybe. But maybe they just need time to know they're safe. His hands never stopped moving, gentle and sure on the colt's neck. I watched the animal's breathing slow, its muscles relax under Thomas's patient touch. Something inside my chest loosened, a knot I hadn't even realized was there. "Your wife?" I said suddenly. "What was she like?" Thomas's hands stilled for just a moment. "Emily, she was sunshine and strength. Could birth a calf at midnight and have biscuits ready by dawn," sang while she worked. His voice carried the weight of winter. "This place has been too quiet since she left. I'm sorry." "Don't be. She'd have liked you. Would have fussed over you something fierce." The confession hung between us like smoke from a dying fire. I wanted to ask more, to understand the shadows that lived behind his careful kindness, but voices from the direction of the main road shattered the moment's fragile peace. "Whitmore!" The shout carried anger and something darker. "We know you got her." Thomas's entire body went rigid. His hand moved instinctively to the gun on his hip as 5 men on horseback appeared at the gate. I recognized none of them, but their hard faces and aggressive postures spoke a language I understood too well. "Stay behind me," Thomas said quietly, stepping between me and the approaching riders. The leader, a thin man with a sheriff's badge that caught the dying sunlight, dismounted with theatrical authority. "Thomas Whitmore, you're harboring stolen property." "That property has a name," Thomas replied, his voice steady as stone. "Sarah. And she's not stolen? She's free? Her father sold her legal and proper. Bill of sale says she belongs to Jeremiah Cass now." My blood turned to ice water. Jeremiah Cass, the town drunk who beat his horses and buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances. Papa had sold me to Thomas to pay a debt, but someone else had claimed ownership of that debt. "Show me the papers," Thomas demanded. The sheriff unfolded a document with flourishes of legal language I couldn't read, but the signature at the bottom was unmistakably Papa's trembling hand. "Says here she was promised to Cass before you paid her father's debt. Makes your transaction null and void." "That's not how it works," Thomas said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "It is in this county. Girl belongs to Cass. He's been real patient, but his patience is wearing thin." I wanted to run, to hide behind the house's protective walls, but my feet had grown roots in the dust. This was what I'd been afraid of from the beginning. The kindness had been too good to be true, the safety too fragile to last. "Sarah," Thomas said without turning around, "go to the house." "Now hold on," the sheriff said with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Girl should hear this. Cass is offering to be generous. He'll take her back with no hard feelings if she comes willing. If not," he shrugged. "Well, stealing another man's property is a serious crime in these parts." Thomas's hand moved closer to his gun. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." "That's so?" The sheriff's companions spread out in a loose circle, their intent clear. Funny thing about wanting, sometimes what a person wants and what the law says they get to have are 2 different things entirely. The desert wind picked up, scattering dust and possibilities like scattered prayers. I looked at Thomas's rigid shoulders, at the 5 armed men who'd come to drag me away, at the ranch house that had become more home than anywhere I'd ever lived. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I wanted to fight for. The dust had barely settled after the sheriff and his men rode off, but the weight of their threat clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Sarah remained near the fence, her hands gripping the rough wood until splinters pierced her skin. She hardly noticed the sting. Her heart pounded too loudly, echoing the fear that she might still be torn away. Thomas stepped closer, his shadow falling over her as the last rays of sunlight stretched across the yard. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the riders had disappeared. "They said I'll be back," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Men like that never leave a thing half done." Sarah swallowed hard. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "And when they come again?" The words tasted bitter, laced with dread. She had endured being sold once. She could not bear another chain. Thomas turned to her then, his gaze steady and fierce. "Then they'll find me standing here." His hand brushed against hers on the fence, calloused skin against trembling fingers. For a moment the world shrank to that single touch. Sarah felt a flicker of warmth, a fragile promise she was afraid to believe. Later, as darkness claimed the ranch, lanterns glowed in the windows and the silence of the plains stretched wide. Sarah sat by the hearth, staring at the fire, while Thomas paced the room. He checked his rifle, polished his revolver, every movement slow and deliberate. It was not boasting, it was preparation. "You shouldn't have to fight for me," she whispered. The words slipped out like a confession, heavy with shame and longing. Thomas stopped, the firelight carving sharp lines across his face. "It isn't sit about what I have to do," he said, his voice low and steady. "It sits about what I choose to do." Sarah's breath caught. She had been bartered like livestock, stripped of choice, her fate written by others. Yet here stood a man who spoke of choice as if it were sacred, and as if she were worth the fight. Outside, coyotes cried in the distance, lonely and haunting. Inside, the fire burned low, casting their shadows close together on the cabin walls. Though danger loomed, Sarah felt the first fragile thread of hope weaving into her heart. "I'm not going anywhere." The words left my mouth before my mind could catch them. 5 guns turned my way. Thomas tensed like a coiled spring, but I felt stronger than I had in weeks. "Sarah," Thomas warned softly. "No." I stepped forward, away from his protection. "Away from safety." I said, "I'm not going." The sheriff laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "Girl, you don't get a choice in this." "Don't I?" Could I really trust Thomas? Yes. Was survival worth the cost of my freedom? No. Some things mattered more than breathing. "Show me those papers again," I said. The sheriff held up the document. Papa's signature stared back at me like an accusation, but something was wrong. The date was wrong. "This says Papa promised me to cast 3 days ago," I said. "But Thomas paid our debt 5 weeks ago." "What of it?" "That means Papa sold me twice." Papa had sold me twice. Yes, twice, like cattle at market. Thomas straightened. His hand moved away from his gun. "That's fraud." "That's a lie." The sheriff's confidence cracked like old leather. But what I didn't know was that Thomas had been expecting this. What I didn't know was that he'd been preparing for this fight since the day he brought me home. What I didn't know was that love had been his plan all along. "Mrs. Henderson," Thomas called toward the house. The elderly woman appeared on the porch. In her hands was a wooden box. She walked toward us with purpose. No fear, no hesitation. The dust swirled around her feet like powder smoke. "What's in the box?" the sheriff demanded. Mrs. Henderson opened it. Inside were papers, official papers with seals and signatures. "Marriage license," she said simply. "Filed in the county seat yesterday." My heart stopped. "Marriage license? You married her?" The sheriff's voice rose an octave. "Yesterday afternoon," Thomas said calmly. "Judge Murphy performed the ceremony." The world tilted sideways. I stared at Thomas. "We're married?" "In name only," he said quietly. "For protection. A man can't claim another man's wife." And that was when everything changed. Everything. The sheriff's face turned red as sunset. His men shifted nervously in their saddles. Their horses stamped and snorted. Their legal ground had just crumbled beneath their boots like desert sand. "This is a sham," he sputtered. "Is it?" Thomas pulled out his own papers. Judge Murphy's signature. 2 witnesses, all legal and proper. I couldn't breathe. Married. We were married. Thomas had married me to keep me safe, without asking, without telling me. Should I be angry? Grateful? I didn't know. But what she didn't know was that her heart had already made the choice weeks ago. Cass won't stand for this, the sheriff warned. He's got influence in this county. Then Cass can take it up with the judge, Thomas replied. Or with me. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Thomas's hand rested easy on his holster, relaxed but ready. But the real secret was still hidden. I could see it in Thomas's eyes. This wasn't just about protection. Something deeper was at work here. Something that made my heart race like a wild Mustang. You planned this, I whispered. Thomas met my gaze. I did. Why? The sheriff mounted his horse with angry jerks. His men followed. They knew when they were beaten. This ain't over, Whitmore. Yes, it is, Thomas called back. We watched them ride away. Dust clouds followed them like ghosts. The desert swallowed their angry voices. 5 riders became 4 black dots, then 3. Then nothing. When they were gone, I turned to face my husband. My husband, why didn't you tell me? Would you have said yes? Honest question. Honest answer. I don't know. That's why I didn't ask. Mrs. Henderson had returned to the house. We stood alone in the gathering darkness. Stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had watched me cry in Papa's cabin. The same stars that had seen me sold like cattle. But what she didn't know was that those same stars had watched Thomas fall in love, week by week, day by day, smile by stolen smile. What happens now? I asked. Nothing changes, Thomas said. You keep your room. I keep mine. The marriage is just paper. Just paper. But paper had power. Paper had saved me from Jeremiah Cass. Paper had made me Thomas Whitmore's wife. What if I want something to change? The question hung between us like smoke from a campfire. Thomas studied my face in the starlight, looking for truth, looking for certainty, looking for hope. Sarah, you saved me twice now, I said. Once from poverty, once from Cass. When do I get to save you? I don't need saving. Don't you? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. The desert wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, wild and free and unafraid. Could I be that brave? Could I be that free? This house has been too quiet, he said finally. Then let's fill it with noise. Yet the real secret was still hidden. I could feel it in the way Thomas looked at me, like he was afraid to hope, afraid to want, afraid to love again. But what he didn't know was that I was done being afraid. What he didn't know was that love had already begun growing in the quiet spaces between us, like wild flowers after rain. Unexpected but unstoppable. Mrs. Whitmore, he said softly, testing the name, testing the possibility. Mr. Whitmore, I replied. And for the first time since Emily died, Thomas smiled, really smiled. The expression transformed his entire face, made him look younger, made him look alive. The marriage might have started as protection, but protection could become something more, something real, something worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Cass wouldn't give up easily. The town would gossip. People would question our sudden wedding. Was it real? Was it love? Only time would tell. But tonight under the vast western sky, I was Sarah Whitmore, wife to a good man, mistress of a beautiful ranch, free to choose my own future. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the darkness an owl called, night sounds of a world at peace. I reached for Thomas's hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm, strong, real. Sarah, he whispered. Thomas. We stood there in the starlight, husband and wife, 2 broken souls learning to be whole again. And what I chose was love. Love and hope and the courage to believe in second chances. 3 months had passed since that night under the stars. 3 months of careful smiles and polite conversation. 3 months of pretending my heart didn't race every time Thomas walked into a room. I woke that morning to fresh coffee and bacon sizzling in the pan. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows like liquid gold. Thomas stood at the stove, his dark hair tousled from sleep. Morning, Mrs. Whitmore, he said without turning around. Morning. We'd fallen into this strange dance. Husband and wife in name only, sharing the same house but sleeping in separate rooms. Safe words, safe distance. But I was getting tired of safe. Thomas set a plate in front of me. Our fingers brushed when I reached for my coffee. Lightning shot up my arm. Cattle are looking good, he said. Spring's been kind to us. That's wonderful. Thomas. Yes. Are you happy? Really happy with this arrangement we have. He went very still. Those blue eyes searched my face. Are you asking because you're not? Always answering questions with questions. I'm asking because I need to know. But what I didn't know was that Thomas lay awake every night wondering the same thing. Come with me, I said suddenly. I want to show you something. Thomas followed me to the parlor where Emily's piano sat silent. I'd been teaching myself to play in secret, using her old sheet music. I sat down, pressed my fingers to the ivory keys. The melody was simple, a gentle tune about hope finding its way through sorrow. Thomas went absolutely still. Emily used to play that song, he whispered. I know, Mrs. Henderson told me. You don't have to. I want to. When the last note faded, silence settled between us. She would have liked you, Thomas said quietly. Emily would have liked you very much. But what she didn't know was that the hardest truth was still ahead. Would she have minded? About us? No, she'd have wanted me to be happy. And that was when everything changed. Thomas stepped closer, close enough that I could smell soap and leather, and that particular scent that was just him, Sarah. Yes? I need to tell you something, about why I really married you. My heart hammered. What do you mean? It wasn't just about protection, it was about the way you trusted me that first night. The way you helped Mrs. Henderson without being asked. The way you hum while hanging laundry. Could this be real? I've been falling in love with you since the day I brought you home, he continued, and I'm tired of pretending I haven't. The words I'd been holding back finally broke free. What if I told you I love you too? His eyes went wide. Do you? Really? Yes, more than I ever thought possible. Thomas crossed the room in 2 strides. His hands cupped my face. Say it again. I love you, Thomas Whitmore. And then he kissed me, not careful or respectful, but desperate and hungry. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. So what happens now? I asked. Now we stop pretending this marriage is just paper. And that was the moment when everything changed forever. Yet the real secret was still hidden. Mrs. Henderson had been watching from the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. That afternoon we walked the property together, really together, hand in hand along the creek that wound through the valley. I want to expand the house, Thomas said. Add more rooms. What kind of rooms? Nurseries, children's bedrooms. Hope and uncertainty warred in his expression. If that's something you'd want. Children. Our children. I'd want that very much. Thomas spun me around until I was laughing and dizzy. Sarah Whitmore. Yes. Will you marry me? For real this time? I stared at him. We're already married. I know, but I want to do it right, with a real proposal and real choice. Was this wonderful man really offering me everything I'd never dared to dream? Yes, I whispered. Yes, I'll marry you again. That evening we sat on the porch watching sunset paint the sky. Thomas's arm was around my shoulders. For the first time in my life I felt completely home. Do you think Papa knew? I asked. That you were a good man. Maybe. Or maybe he just got lucky. We both got lucky. Yet the real surprise was waiting just beyond the door. But what I didn't know was that Papa had indeed known. He'd asked around about Thomas Whitmore before accepting his offer. 6 months later, Judge Murphy married us again in the little white church. This time the whole community came to watch. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears through the ceremony. Jeremiah Cass had left town. The crooked sheriff had been voted out. Justice had a way of working itself out. After the ceremony, Thomas and I danced while fiddles played. My white dress, Emily's dress, altered to fit, swirled around my ankles. Any regrets? Thomas asked. Not a single one. Even about being sold like cattle? Especially about that. Because sometimes the worst things lead to the most beautiful endings. As we danced, I saw Mrs. Henderson talking to a young woman, a girl who looked lost and scared. Who's that? I asked Thomas. Mary Patterson. Her father owes money all over town. I understood immediately. Another girl facing the same choice I'd once faced. We should help her. How? We'll need help with the house, and with the children when they come. Thomas smiled. You want to save her? I want to give her what you gave me. A choice, and so we did. Mary came to work for us the following week, shy and jumpy at first. But slowly she began to bloom under kindness and safety, just like I had. 1 year later I stood in that same kitchen where I'd eaten my first breakfast as Mrs. Whitmore, but now it truly was my kitchen, my home, my life. My hand rested on my growing belly. Our first child would arrive by Christ,